What's your thought on Hakeem Jeffries? Not a full-throated endorsement, not an endorsement at all. They're going to meet tomorrow, and he'll have a statement. Is there a fear by some Democratic leaders of making this look like a deal or some coronation?
Well, I think it has been stunning how quickly the party has coalesced around Harris. I think more so than people may have expected. So I think they are trying to be conscious of making sure that they feel like the will of the people is being respected, but also that the party doesn't get torn apart in this process when they really only have a few weeks left before the Democratic National Convention kicks off on August 19th. So I think they're trying to balance things.
Yeah, so we have 4 weeks to go when it's going to be the delegates that ultimately decide who the nominee is. And yet we have seen a number of state delegations in the last 24 hours, Gregory, already deciding to throw their support behind Harris. Is she going to be the presumptive nominee before too long?
We have this impromptu primary, right, that just sort of came out of nowhere. And her magic number, as was Biden's, is 1,976 delegates to clinch the nomination. As of the time I walked into this studio, she was at 1,200 and some. So it's snowballing very quickly. By this time tomorrow, we may well be calling her presumptive nominee, Kamala Harris.
We haven't heard from the Obamas. Nancy Pelosi was a big one today, as we already mentioned. Is that the deal closer? And what are they waiting for?
I mean, I covered the Obama administration, the Obama presidency, and he was very careful with these kinds of statements and exactly what he wanted to convey. So yesterday, he wanted the focus to be on Joe Biden, his old running mate, his old vice president, making sure that the world recognized Biden for what he has accomplished. He also is a party elder and doesn't want to maybe be perceived as putting his finger on the scale, but certainly once it's clear that there's no path forward for anybody else but the vice president, you can bet that he'll be out on the campaign trail for her.
Well, Gregory, as you raised the idea that Obama wanted to recognize the president and public servant that Joe Biden has been, it's also worth noting that earlier today, Kamala Harris did have an opportunity to speak to the cameras the first time she was giving remarks in an official event after President Biden's endorsement, and she used the moment to talk about his legacy. Here's what she had to say.
Joe Biden's legacy of accomplishment over the past 3 years is unmatched in modern history. In one term, he has already surpassed the legacy of most presidents who have served 2 terms in office.
So, Peggy, they're talking about what Joe Biden has been able to accomplish over the course of roughly 3.5 years. We should also talk about what Harris's campaign has been able to accomplish in just 24 hours. They say they raised $81 million in the first day. 60% of the 888,000 donors, I believe, were first-time contributors in this cycle. What is the money telling us about the excitement around her candidacy?
Well, it's clear that she's been able to rally some support from the small donors to the big donors. We have a story out on the Bloomberg right now about how a number of people on Wall Street have already come out behind her with not only their support vocally, but also with their pocketbooks, Ray McGuire from Lazard being one of them. I think it's also interesting, though, just to note that one of the most well-read stories on the Bloomberg terminal right now is actually about Trump and what his team is going to do, because when they're looking at the money, $81 million in 24 hours, and also the fact that the party is coalescing around her. The question for Trump is, okay, how are they going to have to change their strategy around voters? Because it is clearly looking like Harris is going to be his challenger now, younger, a woman, and someone who could potentially change the game when it comes to some of these swing states, particularly with minority voters.
Interesting to hear from Glenn Youngkin earlier here, a voice that we turn to get a sense of what the Republican messaging is here, the governor of Virginia. He spoke earlier on Bloomberg TV and radio, had this to say about a Harris candidacy.
I'm a Republican governor, and so I'm seeing it from the other side, but the amount of pressure that his party was placing on him to step aside was enormous, and there has been chaos in the Democratic Party. You really do see Joe Biden faltering on his ability to campaign, so no, not a huge surprise.
Speaking to us at the Farnborough Air Show, Gregory, what does this mean for strategy in the Trump campaign? They'll tell you this is a wash, that Kamala Harris, the same thing as Joe Biden, that this is the same campaign, but his messaging will have to shift here, right?
Yeah, and it's been awfully inconsistent even over the past 24, 48 hours, because the messaging from Republicans was that Joe Biden's too old to be president. He's too old. He's too old. And then all of a sudden, Biden steps aside. They get a younger candidate. And they say, well, we want Biden back, right? They are going to have to make an adjustment in how they deal with a Harris candidacy. They've already started to do it. Even before all of this started, they were running ads telling people that if you vote for Joe Biden, what you're really getting is Kamala Harris. They've portrayed her as someone who is inarticulate, someone who relies on sort of her catch her phrases, her crutch phrases, talking about what is it? I'm blanking on what they are, but you know, she has her own set of positives and negatives and vulnerabilities that they're going to have to adjust to.
Yeah.
Well, as we consider the adjustments Donald Trump may or may not make, it is worth noting he posted on True Social this afternoon talking about, quote, dumb as a rock, end quote, Kamala Harris. So that may just give us a sense of what's to come. Peggy, also considering what the Trump campaign still has in its ability to change, he's already selected a vice president in J.D. Vance. Kamala Harris has yet to make that decision. How should we be thinking about the way in which she, if she is on the top of the ticket, is strategizing around who might join her, knowing it's not just Trump, but Trump and Vance she has to counter?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and one of them is the issue of the economy. We've seen time and time again, this came up while we were in Milwaukee for the RNC convention last week. The economy is one of the number one issues for voters, but also one of the issues where the Trump campaign feels like it has an advantage when it comes to voters. And one of the things that they think J.D. Vance is a strength around, talking to those American workers who feel left behind. So I think her pick for VP will have to take that into consideration. How do they message around the economy and inflation and the cost of living? Immigration is another, and I think the third is the swing states. Can she pull someone in who could help her in one of those key swing states?